Soldier dies in her arms on a freezing battlefield. But when he comes back to life, what he tells her will shake the very foundation of everything she believes. Was it just a dream, or something more? Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked the story and where you're watching from and why you're following this. It started with a single question whispered beside a hospital bed. Who did this to you? But what the young woman couldn't remember was exactly what someone in town was desperate to keep hidden. By the time the sun rose, the detective realized someone powerful was willing to kill to keep their secrets buried. Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you like the story and where you're watching from and why you're following this. The rain fell in relentless sheets over Millbrook, Massachusetts, turning the cobblestone streets into mirrors that reflected the gaslights in fractured golden patterns. It was the autumn of 1902, and the small industrial town nestled between Boston and the Berkshire Hills had never known a night quite like this one. Detective William Ashford stood beneath the awning of the Grand Union Hotel, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the wet pavement. At 32 years of age, he cut an imposing figure with his broad shoulders, dark hair slicked back from a strong, angular face, and eyes the color of storm clouds. He had arrived on the evening train from Boston, summoned by a telegram that had reached the district office just that morning. The message had been brief, almost cryptic. Young woman found injured. Circumstances suspicious. Require immediate assistance. William adjusted his wool overcoat and stepped into the rain, his leather boots splashing through puddles as he made his way toward the town's modest hospital. The building stood at the corner of Main Street and Riverside Avenue, a 3-story brick structure with tall windows that glowed warmly against the darkness. As he climbed the front steps, he couldn't shake the feeling that this case would be different from the routine investigations he had handled over the past year. Inside, the hospital smelled of carbolic acid and lavender. A nurse with silver-streaked hair looked up from her desk, her expression weary but kind. "Detective Ashford?" she asked, rising to her feet. "Yes, ma'am. I'm here about the young woman who was brought in." The nurse nodded solemnly. "Miss Charlotte Brennan. She's resting now, but Dr. Morrison said you could speak with her briefly. She's been asking for someone from the authorities." The nurse paused, her voice dropping to a whisper. "It's a terrible business, detective. Simply terrible." William followed the nurse down a narrow corridor lined with wooden doors. The floorboards creaked beneath their feet, and from somewhere deeper in the building came the muffled sound of voices. They stopped before a door marked with the number 7, and the nurse knocked gently before pushing it open. The room was small but clean, with whitewashed walls and a single window overlooking the street. In the bed lay a young woman, her face pale against the white linens. Even in her injured state, Charlotte Brennan possessed a striking beauty. Her chestnut hair fell in soft waves around her face, and her eyes, though shadowed with pain and fear, were a remarkable shade of deep green. She couldn't have been more than 24 or 25 years old. As William entered, Charlotte turned her head slightly, wincing at the movement. Her right arm was bandaged from wrist to elbow, and there were visible bruises along her collarbone, stark purple marks against her fair skin. "Miss Brennan," William said gently, removing his hat and approaching the bedside. "I'm Detective William Ashford from the district office. I understand you've been through an ordeal. If you're able, I'd like to hear what happened." Charlotte's lips trembled, and for a moment, William thought she might refuse to speak. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "I don't know where to begin, Detective. I'm not even certain what happened myself." William pulled a wooden chair closer to the bed and sat down, keeping his expression calm and reassuring. "Start wherever feels right, Miss Brennan. There's no rush." Charlotte closed her eyes briefly, gathering her thoughts. When she opened them again, there was a determination there that hadn't been present before. "I work as a secretary at the Millbrook Cotton Mill," she began. "Mr. Theodore Whitmore owns the factory. I've been employed there for nearly 3 years now, managing correspondence and keeping the ledgers in order." "And you were attacked?" William asked carefully. "I believe so, though I cannot remember all the details clearly." Charlotte's hand moved to touch the bandage on her arm, then stopped midway, as though the gesture caused her pain. "Yesterday evening I was working late. Mr. Whitmore had asked me to prepare some documents for a meeting he had scheduled for this morning. The factory was mostly empty. The workers had left at 6 o'clock, and only a few of the supervisors remained in the building." She paused, her breathing shallow. William waited patiently, his trained eye noting every detail of her demeanor, every flicker of emotion that crossed her delicate features. "I was in the main office on the second floor," Charlotte continued. "It was perhaps 7:30 when I heard footsteps in the hallway outside. I thought it might be Mr. Whitmore returning, or perhaps Mr. Donnelly, the foreman. But the footsteps stopped just outside the door, and whoever it was didn't enter immediately." "Did you recognize the footsteps?" William asked. "The gate, perhaps, or the sound of the shoes?" Charlotte shook her head slowly. "No, Detective. I wish I could say that I did, but the truth is, I was so focused on my work that I didn't pay much attention at first. It was only when the door opened very slowly, almost cautiously, that I began to feel uneasy." William leaned forward slightly, his hands clasped together. "What happened when the door opened?" "A man entered," Charlotte said, her voice growing steadier as she spoke, as though the act of recounting the events was giving her strength. "He was wearing a dark coat and a hat pulled low over his face. I couldn't see his features clearly because the lamp on my desk cast shadows across the room. I asked him what he wanted, whether he had business with Mr. Whitmore." "And did he respond?" "No," Charlotte whispered. "He didn't say a word. He simply stood there in the doorway, watching me. I felt my heart begin to race, Detective. Something about his silence was more terrifying than any threat he could have spoken." William could see the fear returning to her eyes as she relived the memory. He spoke gently. "You're very brave to tell me this, Miss Brennan. Please, go on." Charlotte drew a shaky breath. "I stood up from my desk and demanded that he identify himself. I told him that if he didn't leave immediately, I would call for help. That's when he moved toward me. It happened so quickly. One moment he was standing in the doorway, and the next he was crossing the room in long, purposeful strides." "Did he strike you?" "I tried to move away from him, to reach the door, but he grabbed my arm. That's when I screamed. I screamed as loudly as I could, hoping someone in the building would hear me. He pushed me against the desk, and I felt something sharp cut into my arm. I don't know if it was a letter opener from the desk or if he had brought something with him. Everything became confused after that." William's jaw tightened. "Did anyone come to your aid?" "Yes," Charlotte said, a hint of relief entering her voice. "Mr. Donnelly, the foreman. He must have been in one of the lower offices and heard my scream. He came running up the stairs, and when he burst into the office, the man who attacked me released his grip and fled. Mr. Donnelly tried to chase him, but the man was too fast. He disappeared into the darkness outside the factory. Can you remember anything else about your attacker? His height, his build, the sound of his voice?" Charlotte closed her eyes, concentrating. "He was tall, perhaps as tall as you, Detective, and strong. When he grabbed me, I couldn't break free no matter how hard I struggled. But his voice, no, he never spoke. Not a single word." William made mental notes of every detail. A tall man, strong, silent, who had specifically targeted Charlotte Brennan in the factory office. But why? What had motivated this attack? "Miss Brennan," William said carefully, "has anyone threatened you recently? Have you noticed anyone following you or paying you unusual attention?" Charlotte's brow furrowed in thought. "No, Detective. My life is quite ordinary. I live in a boarding house on Elm Street with 3 other young women. I go to work each morning, return home each evening, and attend church on Sundays. I have no enemies that I know of, no suitors who might harbor resentment or jealousy. What about your work at the mill? Have you come across anything unusual in the ledgers or correspondence? Anything that might have made you a target?" At this question, Charlotte's expression changed subtly. A shadow passed across her face, and she looked away from William toward the window. "I'm not certain," she said slowly. "There have been some irregularities in recent weeks, small discrepancies in the accounts that I couldn't quite explain. I mentioned them to Mr. Whitmore, but he assured me they were merely clerical errors and that he would look into them himself." William felt a stirring of interest. Financial irregularities at a factory, followed by an attack on the secretary who had discovered them. The connection seemed too significant to be mere coincidence. "Miss Brennan," he said, his voice taking on a more urgent tone, "I need you to think very carefully. These discrepancies you mentioned, what did they involve? Missing funds? Unexplained expenses?" Charlotte turned back to face him, and William could see that she understood the importance of his question. "Both," she admitted. "There were payments recorded to suppliers that didn't match the invoices I received, and there were withdrawals from the factory's operating account that had no corresponding documentation. When I added up the amounts over the past 2 months, it came to nearly $1,500. William let out a low whistle. $1,500 was a substantial sum, enough to build a house or support a family for several years. Someone at the Millbrook Cotton Mill was embezzling money, and Charlotte Brennan had discovered their secret. Did you tell anyone else about these discrepancies besides Mr. Whitmore? No, Detective. I thought it would be improper to discuss the factory's financial affairs with anyone outside of management. And how did Mr. Whitmore react when you brought this to his attention? Charlotte hesitated, and in that hesitation, William sensed there was something she wasn't telling him. He seemed concerned, she said finally. He thanked me for being diligent and told me he would investigate the matter personally. That was 3 days ago. I haven't spoken to him about it since. Before William could ask another question, there was a knock at the door. Dr. Morrison entered, a short, balding man with round spectacles perched on his nose. I'm sorry, Detective, but Miss Brennan needs her rest. You can return tomorrow to continue your interview. William stood, replacing his hat on his head. He looked down at Charlotte, who met his gaze with those striking green eyes. Thank you for your cooperation, Miss Brennan. I promise you I will find out who did this to you. Charlotte reached out with her uninjured hand and touched his sleeve lightly. Detective Ashford, she said softly, please be careful. Whoever attacked me was desperate enough to strike in the factory itself. I fear what he might do if he feels cornered. William placed his hand over hers briefly, a gesture of reassurance. I will be careful, Miss Brennan, and I will ensure that you're protected as well. I'll have a constable stationed outside your door tonight. As he left the hospital and stepped back into the rain-soaked night, William's mind was already racing through the possibilities. An embezzlement scheme at the cotton mill, a young woman attacked after discovering financial irregularities, and a silent assailant who had vanished into the darkness. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to take shape, but the picture they formed was still unclear. He made his way to the local constabulary, a small brick building near the town square. Inside, he found Constable Henry Porter, a sturdy man in his late 40s with a thick mustache and shrewd eyes. Detective Ashford, Porter greeted him, rising from his desk. We've been expecting you. Terrible business about Miss Brennan. Indeed it is, William agreed, shaking the constable's hand. I need you to post a man outside her hospital room tonight. I don't want her left unguarded for a moment. Porter nodded gravely. Consider it done. Do you have any leads? Possibly, William said. Tell me, Constable, what do you know about Theodore Whitmore and his cotton mill? Constable Porter stroked his mustache thoughtfully, his weathered face creasing with concentration. Theodore Whitmore, he began, settling back into his chair and gesturing for William to take a seat across from him. He's been running that cotton mill for nearly 15 years now. Inherited it from his father, old Jacob Whitmore, who founded the operation back in the 70s. The mill employs about 200 workers, mostly immigrants from Ireland and Italy. It's the largest employer in Millbrook, Detective. Half the families in this town depend on those wages. William listened intently, his sharp mind cataloging every detail. And what kind of man is Theodore Whitmore? Has he given you any trouble over the years? Porter shook his head slowly. No trouble at all. He's always been a pillar of the community. Sits on the town council, donates to the church, sponsors the annual harvest festival. His wife, Margaret, runs a charity for widows and orphans. On the surface, they're model citizens. On the surface, William repeated, catching the subtle implication in Porter's words. But beneath? The constable leaned forward, lowering his voice even though they were alone in the office. There have been whispers, Detective. Nothing substantial, mind you. Just the kind of talk that circulates in a small town. Some of the mill workers have complained about reduced wages over the past year, claimed that Whitmore was cutting their pay without explanation. And there was an incident last spring when a group of workers tried to organize a protest over safety conditions. Whitmore dismissed 3 of the ringleaders the very next day. William's eyes narrowed. A man protecting his profits, perhaps, or a man with something to hide. There's more, Porter continued, his expression growing darker. About 6 months ago, one of the mill's bookkeepers, a young fellow named Peter Sullivan, died under suspicious circumstances. He fell from a 3rd-story window at the factory. The official ruling was accidental death, but Sullivan's widow insisted that her husband had been frightened in the weeks before his death. Said he'd discovered something at work that troubled him deeply, but he wouldn't tell her what it was. William felt a chill run down his spine that had nothing to do with his rain-dampened clothes. And no one investigated further? Porter's face reddened slightly. The mayor put pressure on us to close the case quickly. Didn't want any scandals that might drive investors away from Millbrook. Sullivan was buried, his widow received a small settlement from the mill, and the matter was forgotten. He paused, meeting William's gaze directly. Until now. Until Charlotte Brennan discovered financial irregularities in the mill's accounts, William said quietly. And now she's lying in a hospital bed with injuries that could easily have been fatal if she hadn't screamed for help. The two men sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the implications settling between them. Finally, William stood, his tall frame unfolding with purpose. I need to visit the mill tomorrow morning. I want to examine those ledgers myself and speak with Mr. Whitmore. I'll accompany you, Porter offered. And Detective, there's one more thing you should know. Theodore Whitmore has connections in Boston, powerful friends in the state legislature and the banking industry. If he is involved in something criminal, he won't go down easily. William's jaw set with determination. Then we'll need to build an ironclad case against him. Thank you, Constable. I'll meet you here at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. He left the constabulary and made his way through the rain to the boarding house where he had arranged lodgings. The Riverside Inn was a modest establishment run by a widow named Mrs. Harriet Fletcher, a round-faced woman with kind eyes who showed him to a small but clean room on the second floor. After she departed, William stood at the window, looking out over the darkened town. Somewhere out there was a man willing to kill to protect his secrets, and William had made it his mission to expose those secrets, no matter the cost. Sleep came reluctantly that night, his mind turning over the pieces of the puzzle. When dawn finally broke over Millbrook, painting the sky in shades of pearl and rose, William was already dressed and ready. He took breakfast in the dining room downstairs, forcing himself to eat despite his impatience to begin the investigation. Mrs. Fletcher insisted on serving him eggs, ham, fresh bread, and strong coffee, chattering pleasantly about the weather and the town's upcoming autumn fair. At precisely 8 o'clock, William arrived at the constabulary to find Porter waiting with 2 cups of steaming coffee and a grim expression. I sent word to the hospital, Porter reported. Miss Brennan had a peaceful night. The doctor says she's recovering well, though she's still quite shaken. Good, William said, accepting one of the coffee cups. Has anyone tried to visit her besides the medical staff? Only her landlady, Mrs. Gertrude Morrison, and one of her fellow boarders, a Miss Elizabeth Hayes. The constable on duty checked their identities before allowing them in. William nodded his approval. Excellent. Now let's pay a visit to the Millbrook Cotton Mill. The factory stood on the eastern edge of town, a massive brick structure 4 stories tall with rows of tall windows and 3 towering smokestacks that reached toward the morning sky. Even at this early hour, the building hummed with activity. Workers streamed through the main gates, men in wool caps and women in simple dresses, their faces etched with the weariness of hard labor. The air was thick with the smell of machine oil and raw cotton. William and Porter entered through the main office entrance, a door marked with polished brass fixtures that spoke of prosperity. Inside, they found themselves in a reception area decorated with dark wood paneling and framed photographs of the mill's history. A young clerk, barely 20 years old, with nervous eyes and ink-stained fingers, looked up from his desk with obvious anxiety. "May I help you, gentlemen?" he asked, his voice cracking slightly. Porter stepped forward, his constable's badge visible on his coat. "We're here to see Mr. Theodore Whitmore. Official business regarding the incident involving Miss Charlotte Brennan." The clerk's face paled. "Of course, sir. Mr. Whitmore is in his office. I'll announce you immediately." He scurried through a door behind his desk, and William could hear muffled voices from the room beyond. A moment later, the clerk returned and gestured for them to enter. "Mr. Whitmore will see you now." Theodore Whitmore's office was a study in understated wealth. Leather-bound books lined mahogany shelves, an oriental rug covered the polished floor, and behind an enormous oak desk sat a man who radiated authority. Whitmore was in his early 50s, with silver-streaked hair combed back from a high forehead, sharp blue eyes, and the bearing of someone accustomed to being obeyed. He wore an expensive suit of charcoal gray, and a gold watch chain gleamed across his vest. "Constable Porter," Whitmore said, rising to his feet but making no move to shake hands. "And you must be the detective from Boston. I've been expecting this visit." His tone was courteous but cool, the voice of a man who had dealt with authorities before and was not intimidated by them. "Detective William Ashford." William introduced himself, taking in every detail of the man before him. "Thank you for seeing us, Mr. Whitmore. I understand this must be a difficult time for you." One of your employees has been seriously injured. Whitmore's expression remained carefully neutral. Indeed, Charlotte Brennan is an exemplary secretary. I was horrified to learn of the attack. How is she? Recovering, William said simply. Mr. Whitmore, I'd like to ask you some questions about the evening of the incident. I understand Miss Brennan was working late at your request? That's correct. I had asked her to prepare some contracts for a meeting with potential investors. The documents required careful attention, and Charlotte has always been meticulous in her work. Whitmore moved to a side table where a crystal decanter sat with several glasses. May I offer you gentlemen a drink? No? Very well. William took a seat in one of the leather chairs facing the desk, uninvited. Porter remained standing near the door. Miss Brennan mentioned to me that she had discovered some irregularities in the mill's financial records, discrepancies in payments and withdrawals. She says she brought these concerns to you approximately 3 days ago. For the first time, a flicker of emotion crossed Whitmore's face, too quick for William to identify clearly. Annoyance? Fear? Ah, yes. Charlotte did mention some minor accounting errors. I assured her I would look into the matter. These things happen in a large operation like this, Detective. A misplaced decimal point, an invoice entered twice by mistake. Nothing of consequence. $1,500 seems rather consequential, William observed mildly. Whitmore's eyes hardened. I don't know where you got that figure, Detective, but I can assure you that our books are in perfect order. If there are any discrepancies, they are minor and easily explained. William leaned back in his chair. His posture relaxed, but his gaze intense. Mr. Whitmore, I'd like permission to examine those ledgers myself. Purely as part of my investigation into the attack on Miss Brennan, you understand. It would help me determine if there's any connection between what she discovered and what happened to her. The silence that followed was charged with tension. Whitmore's hand tightened almost imperceptibly on the edge of his desk. I'm afraid that's not possible, Detective. The mill's financial records contain proprietary information about our suppliers, our contracts, our business strategies. I cannot simply hand them over to every investigator who asks. Even when one of your employees has been attacked, Porter interjected from his position by the door. Whitmore turned his cold gaze toward the constable. I sympathize deeply with Charlotte's ordeal, but I fail to see how our accounting practices are relevant to what was clearly a random act of violence. Some vagrant likely wandered into the factory looking for valuables and attacked her when she surprised him. William shook his head slowly. I don't believe it was random, Mr. Whitmore. The attack was too specific, too deliberate. Miss Brennan's assailant knew exactly where to find her, knew she would be alone in that office, and he fled when interrupted, rather than attempting to rob her or ransack the office. That suggests to me that his purpose was to silence her, not to steal from her. Whitmore's face flushed with anger. That's quite an accusation, Detective. Are you suggesting that I had something to do with this attack? I'm not accusing anyone of anything, William replied calmly. I'm simply following the evidence wherever it leads. And right now, the evidence suggests that Miss Brennan was attacked because of what she discovered in those ledgers. If you're innocent of any wrongdoing, Mr. Whitmore, then you should have no objection to letting me verify that fact. The factory owner stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This interview is over, Detective Ashford. If you wish to examine my business records, you'll need to obtain a warrant from a judge, and I can assure you that Judge Cartwright will not issue such a warrant based on the wild speculation of an outsider who's been in Millbrook less than a day. William rose to his feet as well, his height matching Whitmore's. Then I'll obtain that warrant, Mr. Whitmore. And in the meantime, I'll be conducting interviews with your employees, particularly those who were present in the factory on the evening of the attack. I trust you have no objection to that? Whitmore's jaw clenched, but he managed a tight smile. My employees are free to speak with whomever they choose, Detective, though I should warn you that you'll find them loyal to this mill and to me. We take care of our workers here. As William and Porter made their way out of the office, the young clerk kept his eyes downcast, pretending to be absorbed in his paperwork. But William noticed the way the young man's hands trembled slightly as he sorted through documents, and he filed that observation away for later consideration. Outside, the morning had grown brighter, though clouds still threatened rain. The factory yard was busy with activity, as wagons loaded with raw cotton were unloaded at the loading docks. William paused to survey the scene, his detective's mind absorbing the layout of the building, the patterns of movement, the faces of the workers. He's hiding something, Porter said quietly beside him. I've known Theodore Whitmore for 15 years, and I've never seen him so defensive. The question is what exactly he's hiding. William replied, and whether he was desperate enough to order an attack on Charlotte Brennan to keep his secret safe. He turned to the constable. I need you to find out everything you can about Peter Sullivan's death. Talk to his widow again, examine the scene where he fell, speak to anyone who was working at the mill that day. There's a connection here, I'm certain of it. Porter nodded grimly. And what will you do? I'm going to visit Miss Brennan again. I need to know more about those financial discrepancies, exactly what she saw in those ledgers. And then I'm going to have a conversation with Mr. Donnelly, the foreman who interrupted the attack. He may have seen or heard something that could identify the assailant. The two men parted ways, Porter heading back toward the constabulary, while William made his way to the hospital. The streets of Millbrook were coming alive with the day's commerce. Shop owners swept their doorsteps, and housewives carried baskets to the market. It seemed impossible that such violence could lurk beneath the surface of this peaceful town, but William had learned long ago that evil often wore the mask of respectability. At the hospital, he found Charlotte sitting up in bed, looking considerably better than she had the previous evening. Her color had returned, and though her arm remained bandaged, she held herself with more strength and composure. She brightened visibly when William entered the room, and he felt an unexpected warmth at her smile of recognition. Detective Ashford, she greeted him. I was hoping you would return. I've been thinking about our conversation last night, and I believe I may have remembered something important. William pulled the chair close to her bedside once more, removing his hat and giving her his full attention. I'm glad to see you looking better, Miss Brennan. Please, tell me what you've remembered. Charlotte's green eyes were clear and focused now, without the fog of pain and shock that had clouded them before. Last night, I told you that my attacker never spoke, but I've been replaying those moments in my mind over and over, and I realize now that I did hear something. Not words exactly, but a sound. When he grabbed my arm and I screamed, he made a noise, a kind of sharp intake of breath, and there was something familiar about it, though I couldn't place it at the time. Familiar? William leaned forward, his pulse quickening. Are you saying you might have heard that sound before? That you might know your attacker? I'm not certain, Charlotte admitted, frustration evident in her voice. It's just a feeling, a sense that I've encountered this person somewhere, perhaps at the mill, perhaps elsewhere in town, but I can't quite grasp the memory. It's like trying to remember a dream that fades the moment you wake. William considered this carefully. Miss Brennan, I need you to think back over the past few weeks. Has anyone at the mill been behaving strangely around you? Watching you more closely than usual? Asking questions about your work? Charlotte's brow furrowed in concentration. She was silent for a long moment, her fingers absently pleating the edge of her blanket. When she finally spoke, her voice was uncertain. There is one thing that strikes me as odd now, though I didn't think much of it at the time. About 2 weeks ago, I was working late one evening, much as I was when I was attacked. I had left my desk to retrieve a file from the cabinet across the room, and when I returned, I had the distinct impression that someone had been at my desk. Papers that I had carefully organized were slightly disarranged, and my ledger had been moved. Did you see anyone? No, but I heard footsteps in the hallway moving away quickly. I called out, asking if someone was there, but no one answered. I assumed it was one of the night watchmen making his rounds. William made a mental note to interview the night watchman. And this happened 2 weeks ago, around the same time you first noticed the financial discrepancies? Yes, actually. It was the very evening I had been reviewing the accounts and first discovered the irregularities. I remember because I had been planning to speak with Mr. Whitmore about it the following day. A pattern was emerging now, clear and damning. Someone at the mill had known about Charlotte's discovery, had attempted to determine what she knew by examining her desk, and when that hadn't been sufficient, had resorted to violence to silence her. William's mind raced through the implications of Charlotte's revelation. Someone with access to the office, someone familiar enough with the mill's operations to move through the building unnoticed, someone with a vested interest in keeping the financial irregularities hidden. The circle of suspects was narrowing, but he needed more concrete evidence before he could make any accusations. Miss Brennan, he said carefully, I visited the mill this morning and spoke with Mr. Whitmore. He refused to allow me access to the ledgers without a warrant, which tells me he has something to hide. I need you to recall, in as much detail as possible, exactly what you saw in those accounts. Every payment, every withdrawal, every discrepancy you can remember. Charlotte nodded, her expression growing more determined. I keep detailed notes of everything I work on, Detective. It's a habit I developed early in my career, and fortunately, I don't keep those notes at the mill. I bring them home with me each evening and store them in my room at the boarding house. They're in a leather portfolio in the bottom drawer of my wardrobe. William felt a surge of hope. Miss Brennan, those notes could be crucial evidence. With your permission, I'd like to retrieve them from your room and examine them. Of course, Charlotte said without hesitation. I'll write a note to Mrs. Morrison, my landlady, authorizing you to enter my room. She's very protective of her boarders, and she won't let anyone in without proper permission. She paused, a slight blush coloring her cheeks. I must apologize in advance for the state of my room, Detective. I wasn't expecting company, and it may not be as tidy as I would like. William couldn't help but smile at her concern for propriety even in the midst of such dire circumstances. I assure you, Miss Brennan, I'm only interested in your notes, not the organization of your personal space. He watched as she carefully wrote out the authorization with her uninjured hand, her penmanship elegant despite the awkward angle. As she handed him the note, their fingers touched briefly, and William felt an unexpected jolt of connection. Charlotte's eyes met his, and for a moment, the professional distance between detective and witness seemed to dissolve. There was something about this young woman that drew him in, not just her beauty, but her courage, her intelligence, her determination to see justice done despite the danger she had faced. Detective Ashford, Charlotte said softly, please be careful. Whoever did this to me is still out there, and if they discover you're getting close to the truth, they may strike again. I will be careful, William assured her, his voice gentle. And I promise you, Miss Brennan, I will not rest until the person responsible for this is brought to justice. He left the hospital with Charlotte's note secured in his coat pocket and made his way to the boarding house on Elm Street. The building was a handsome Victorian structure painted in pale yellow with white trim, surrounded by a neat garden that even in late autumn showed signs of careful tending. Mrs. Morrison answered his knock promptly, a tall, angular woman in her 60s with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Mrs. Morrison, William introduced himself, showing his badge. I'm Detective William Ashford, and I'm investigating the attack on Miss Charlotte Brennan. She's given me permission to retrieve some documents from her room. He handed over Charlotte's note. Mrs. Morrison read the note carefully, her lips pursed. How is dear Charlotte? I visited her this morning, but she was sleeping, and I didn't want to disturb her. She's recovering well, ma'am. Her spirits are good, and the doctor is optimistic about her progress. The landlady's stern expression softened slightly. Charlotte is one of my favorite boarders, Detective. Always punctual with her rent, always courteous, always willing to help the other girls. When I heard what happened to her, I was absolutely horrified. This is a respectable house in a respectable neighborhood. Such violence is unthinkable. She led William up a narrow staircase to the second floor and down a hallway papered in a pattern of small roses. Charlotte's room was the third door on the right, and Mrs. Morrison unlocked it with a key from the ring at her waist. I'll wait out here while you conduct your search, Detective. Propriety must be maintained even under these circumstances. William nodded his understanding and entered the room, closing the door behind him. The space was modest but charming, with a single window overlooking the garden, a narrow bed covered in a patchwork quilt, a small writing desk, a wardrobe, and a washstand. The room was neat and organized, just as he would have expected from someone with Charlotte's attention to detail. A few personal touches spoke of her character: a small vase of dried flowers on the windowsill, a stack of books on the bedside table including works by Jane Austen and Charles Dickens, and a framed photograph of an older couple who were likely her parents. William moved to the wardrobe and opened the bottom drawer as Charlotte had instructed. Beneath several neatly folded garments, he found the leather portfolio she had mentioned. Inside were dozens of pages covered in Charlotte's precise handwriting, notes about correspondence, meetings, invoices, and most importantly, her observations about the financial discrepancies. He sat at the small desk and began to read through the documents, his trained eye quickly identifying the pattern that Charlotte had discovered. The irregularities were subtle, the kind that might escape notice in a cursory review of the books. But Charlotte had been thorough, cross-referencing payments with invoices, checking withdrawal dates against bank statements, verifying supplier information. And what she had uncovered was damning. Over the past 6 months, more than $3,000 had been systematically diverted from the mill's accounts through a series of false payments to non-existent suppliers and unauthorized withdrawals. The amounts were never large enough to trigger immediate alarm, usually between $50 and $200 at a time, but they added up to a substantial theft. And based on the patterns Charlotte had documented, the embezzlement had been going on for at least a year, possibly longer. But who had access to the accounts? Who could authorize payments and withdrawals without arousing suspicion? William's mind immediately went to Theodore Whitmore himself, but he knew he couldn't discount other possibilities. The mill's accountant, senior supervisors, even the foreman, might have had the opportunity and means to manipulate the financial records. As William carefully returned the portfolio to the drawer, his eye caught something else, a small journal tucked behind the leather case. It appeared to be Charlotte's personal diary, and while he hesitated to invade her privacy, his detective's instinct urged him to examine it. He pulled it out and opened it to the most recent entries. The pages were filled with Charlotte's thoughts and observations, written in a more personal, flowing style than her business notes. Most of the entries dealt with everyday matters: her work at the mill, her friendships with the other boarders, her correspondence with her parents who lived in Connecticut. But as William flipped back through the pages, one entry from 3 weeks ago caught his attention. I had the most unsettling conversation today with Mr. Whitmore's assistant, Mr. Gerald Thorne. He asked me numerous questions about my work, particularly about the financial records I maintain. His interest seemed excessive, and there was something in his manner that made me uncomfortable. When I mentioned that I had noticed some irregularities in the accounts, his face went quite pale, and he quickly changed the subject. I cannot help but wonder if there is more to this than simple curiosity. William read the passage twice, committing every word to memory. Gerald Thorne. He hadn't encountered that name yet in his investigation, but clearly, the man warranted immediate attention. He carefully replaced the journal and the portfolio, ensuring everything was exactly as he had found it, then exited the room. "Did you find what you needed, Detective?" Mrs. Morrison asked from her position in the hallway. "I did, thank you, ma'am. Tell me, do you know a man named Gerald Thorne? I understand he works at the cotton mill." Mrs. Morrison's expression soured. "Oh, that man. Yes, I know of him. He's Mr. Whitmore's right hand, handles much of the day-to-day business at the mill. A slippery sort, if you ask me. Too smooth, too eager to please. My late husband always said you couldn't trust a man who smiled too much. Has he ever visited this boarding house? Perhaps to see Miss Brennan?" The landlady's eyes narrowed. "He came here once about a month ago. Said he needed Charlotte to sign some documents that couldn't wait until the next business day. I allowed him into the parlor, but I stayed present the entire time. I didn't like the way he looked at her, Detective. It wasn't the look of a man conducting business. It was something else, something that made my skin crawl." William felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. "Did Miss Brennan mention anything about this visit afterward?" "She said it had been unnecessary and inappropriate. The documents could easily have waited until the following morning. She told me she intended to speak with Mr. Whitmore about maintaining proper boundaries with his assistant." "And did she?" "I don't know, Detective. Charlotte is a private person, not given to gossip or complaint, but I could tell the incident had troubled her." William thanked Mrs. Morrison for her help and made his way back into the center of town. His next stop was the constabulary, where he found Porter poring over old reports at his desk, several dusty folders spread out before him. "Detective," Porter greeted him, looking up with grim satisfaction. "I've been reviewing the records from Peter Sullivan's death. You were right to be suspicious. The investigation was cursory at best, and there are several inconsistencies in the witness statements that were never followed up on." William pulled up a chair. "Tell me what you found." "Sullivan fell from a window in the mill's accounting office on the 3rd floor. The official report says he was working late, leaned against the window frame, and it gave way, causing him to fall to his death. But here's what doesn't make sense. That window had been recently repaired. The carpenter who did the work, a man named Tom Bradshaw, swore that the frame was solid. He said there was no way it could have given way under normal circumstances. Was there any sign of a struggle? That's just it. The office was in disarray, papers scattered, a chair overturned. The report attributed it to Sullivan's fall, suggested he had knocked things over as he lost his balance. But his widow told me something interesting when I spoke with her this afternoon. She said Peter had left their house that evening after receiving an urgent message asking him to come to the mill. He told her he had to meet someone, that it was important. Did she know who sent the message? Porter shook his head. She never saw it. Peter destroyed it before he left, which she thought was odd. And here's the most damning detail. Gerald Thorne was the last person seen in the building with Sullivan that night. He claimed he had left before the fall, but the night watchman's log shows he didn't sign out until 20 minutes after the time Sullivan was estimated to have died. William leaned back in his chair, his expression dark. Gerald Thorne. His name keeps appearing in this investigation. Charlotte Brennan's diary mentions him showing unusual interest in her work on the financial records. Mrs. Morrison describes him visiting Charlotte at her boarding house. And now you're telling me he was present when Peter Sullivan, another person who worked with the Mills accounts, died under suspicious circumstances. It seems our Mr. Thorne has a pattern of silencing people who get too close to discovering his crimes, Porter said grimly. The question is, how do we prove it? Charlotte's notes document the embezzlement clearly. If we can connect Thorne to those false payments and unauthorized withdrawals, we'll have our evidence. William stood, pacing the small office. But we need to move carefully. Thorne is clearly dangerous, and he has already shown he's willing to kill to protect his scheme. I don't want to tip our hand until we're ready to make an arrest. A young constable burst through the door at that moment, his face flushed with exertion. Constable Porter, Detective Ashford, there's been an incident at the hospital. A man tried to gain access to Miss Brennan's room. He claimed to be her cousin, but when the guard challenged him, he fled. William's blood ran cold. Description: tall, dark coat, hat pulled low. The guard didn't get a good look at his face. Double the guard on Miss Brennan's room immediately, William ordered. No one gets in except medical staff, and they must be verified. And I want a description of this man circulated to every constable in town. He turned to Porter. Where can I find Gerald Thorne right now? Most likely at the mill. He keeps an office on the second floor near where Charlotte was attacked. William grabbed his hat and coat. Then it's time Mr. Thorne and I had a conversation. The afternoon had turned gray and cold as William strode toward the cotton mill, his jaw set with determination. Workers were beginning to emerge from the factory gates, their shifts ended, their faces weary. William pushed through the crowds and entered the main office, brushing past the startled clerk who tried to intercept him. "Sir, you can't just go back there without—" the young man protested. But William ignored him, taking the stairs two at a time to the second floor. He found the office marked with Gerald Thorne's nameplate and pushed open the door without knocking. The man behind the desk looked up in surprise, and William got his first good look at Charlotte's would-be killer. Gerald Thorne was in his mid-30s, handsome in a sharp, predatory way, with slicked-back dark hair, calculating brown eyes, and the build of an athlete. He was tall, just as Charlotte had described her attacker, and when he stood, William noted the powerful shoulders and strong hands. This was a man capable of violence, despite his fine suit and cultured manner. "Can I help you?" Thorne asked, his voice smooth but with an edge of wariness. William closed the door behind him and showed his badge. "Detective William Ashford. I'm investigating the attack on Charlotte Brennan. I'd like to ask you some questions." Something flickered in Thorne's eyes, too quick to identify, but his expression remained pleasantly neutral. "Of course, Detective. Terrible business about Charlotte. Mr. Whitmore is quite distressed about the whole affair. Please, have a seat." William remained standing. "Where were you on the evening Miss Brennan was attacked?" "I left the mill at 6 o'clock that evening, my usual departure time. I went home, had dinner, and spent the evening reading. I didn't hear about the attack until the following morning." "Can anyone verify your whereabouts?" Thorne's smile was apologetic. "I'm afraid not. I live alone in rooms above the hardware store on Main Street. A solitary existence, but it suits me." "How convenient," William said dryly. "Tell me, Mr. Thorne, what is your role here at the mill? What are your responsibilities?" "I'm Mr. Whitmore's assistant. I handle various administrative duties, oversee some of the paperwork, coordinate with suppliers, that sort of thing. I've been in this position for about 3 years now." "And do you have access to the mill's financial records?" For the first time, Thorne's composure slipped slightly. His eyes narrowed and his fingers drummed once on the desk before he caught himself. "I have limited access, yes, for purposes of verifying invoices and authorizing certain payments. But all significant financial decisions go through Mr. Whitmore himself." "Limited access," William repeated. "But enough to make payments to suppliers, to authorize withdrawals from the operating account?" "Within certain parameters, yes." Thorne's voice had taken on a defensive tone. "Detective, I don't appreciate what you're implying." William leaned forward, placing his hands on Thorne's desk, his imposing presence filling the small office. "I'm not implying anything, Mr. Thorne. I'm stating facts. Fact. Charlotte Brennan discovered financial irregularities totaling more than $3,000. Fact. Shortly after making this discovery, she was attacked by a tall man in a dark coat who tried to silence her permanently. Fact. You have the access and opportunity to embezzle that money. Fact. Peter Sullivan, the previous bookkeeper who likely discovered the same irregularities, died under suspicious circumstances, and you were the last person seen with him." Thorne's face had gone pale, then flushed with anger. "You have no proof of any of this. These are wild accusations based on circumstantial evidence. I had nothing to do with Peter's death. That was a tragic accident, and I certainly didn't attack Charlotte." "Then you won't mind accompanying me to the constabulary to answer more questions," William said, straightening. "And you won't mind providing samples of your handwriting so we can compare them to the signatures on those fraudulent payment authorizations." "I'm not going anywhere with you without speaking to my attorney first," Thorne snapped, his composure completely shattered now. "And Mr. Whitmore will hear about this harassment." "Mr. Whitmore is welcome to lodge a complaint," William replied calmly. "But I should inform you that attempting to visit Miss Brennan at the hospital this afternoon, while disguised as her cousin, was a serious mistake. The guard got a good enough look at you to make an identification." Thorne's face went ashen. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't you? Then perhaps you can explain why you're so desperate to finish what you started. Were you planning to smother her with a pillow? Inject poison into her medicine? Or were you simply going to use your hands again?" The man's control finally broke. She should have minded her own business. Stupid girl, poking through records that didn't concern her. This was supposed to be simple, clean. No one was supposed to get hurt. The words hung in the air between them, a confession born of fury and fear. William saw the exact moment Thorne realized what he had said, watched the man's face transform from rage to horror as he understood he had just incriminated himself. "You're under arrest, Gerald Thorne," William said, his voice hard as iron. "For the attempted murder of Charlotte Brennan, for the embezzlement of funds from the Millbrook Cotton Mill, and for the murder of Peter Sullivan." Thorne's hand moved toward the desk drawer, but William was faster. He crossed the distance between them in 2 long strides and grabbed Thorne's wrist, twisting it sharply. The drawer fell open, revealing a small revolver, but Thorne never reached it. William's other hand seized the man's collar and slammed him against the wall with enough force to rattle the framed certificates hanging there. "Don't make this worse for yourself," William growled, his face inches from Thorne's. "You've already confessed. Now you're going to tell me everything, starting with whether Theodore Whitmore knew about the embezzlement." Thorne's breathing was ragged, his eyes wild with panic. "Whitmore knew nothing. This was all my doing. I was careful, so careful. But that fool Sullivan noticed discrepancies in the quarterly reports. He came to me first, wanted to give me a chance to explain before going to Whitmore. I couldn't let him expose me. Couldn't let everything I'd built be destroyed." "So you killed him," William said, his voice cold with disgust. "You lured him to the mill, pushed him out that window, and made it look like an accident. It wasn't supposed to happen that way." Thorne's voice cracked. "I tried to reason with him, tried to offer him money to stay quiet, but he refused. He said it was a matter of principle, that he couldn't be bought. We struggled, and he fell. It was an accident, I swear it." "And Charlotte? Was attacking her an accident too?" Thorne's expression twisted with something between regret and resentment. "She was just like Sullivan, too honest for her own good. When she started asking questions about the accounts, I knew it was only a matter of time before she uncovered everything. I tried to find out how much she knew, searched her desk when she wasn't looking, but her notes were always with her, or locked away. I had no choice but to silence her." William's grip tightened. "You had every choice. You chose greed over human life. You chose violence over honesty, and now you'll pay the price for those choices." The door burst open behind them, and Constable Porter entered with 2 deputies, their faces grim. They had heard enough of the conversation from the hallway to understand what had transpired. Porter pulled out his handcuffs and secured them around Thorne's wrists with practiced efficiency. "Gerald Thorne," Porter intoned formally, "you are under arrest for embezzlement, attempted murder, and murder. You will be held at the constabulary until such time as you can be transported to Boston to face trial." As the deputies led Thorne away, the man's shoulders sagged in defeat. Whatever dreams of wealth and comfort he had harbored through his crimes had evaporated like morning mist. William watched him go, feeling no satisfaction in the arrest, only a deep weariness and a profound relief that Charlotte was finally safe. Theodore Whitmore appeared in the doorway, his face pale with shock. "Detective Ashford, I heard shouting. What has happened? Why are you arresting Gerald?" William turned to face the mill owner, studying his reaction carefully. The man's surprise appeared genuine, his confusion and distress authentic. "Mr. Whitmore, your assistant has been systematically embezzling funds from your mill for over a year. When Peter Sullivan discovered the theft, Thorne murdered him and made it look like an accident. When Charlotte Brennan found the same irregularities, he attempted to kill her as well." Whitmore sank into a chair, his hand pressed to his chest. "My God, I had no idea. Gerald has been with me for 3 years. I trusted him completely." He looked up at William, his eyes haunted. "Is Charlotte truly safe now?" "She is. Thorne has confessed, and he'll spend the rest of his life in prison for what he's done." The factory owner's hands trembled as he processed this information. "I owe Miss Brennan an enormous debt. If she hadn't been so diligent, so thorough in her work, this theft might have continued indefinitely. Detective, please tell her that her position at the mill is secure for as long as she wants it, with a substantial increase in salary. And I will personally ensure that Peter Sullivan's widow receives compensation for her loss. It's the least I can do." William nodded, some of his suspicion of Whitmore easing. The man had been negligent, perhaps, too trusting of his assistant, but he appeared to be genuinely horrified by Thorne's crimes. "I'll convey your message to Miss Brennan, sir. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to inform her that she's no longer in danger." He left the mill and made his way through the early evening streets toward the hospital. The sky had cleared, and the first stars were beginning to appear, tiny points of light in the deepening blue. The case had been solved in less than 3 days, but William felt as though he had lived through weeks of investigation. The weight of what Thorne had done, the lives he had destroyed or damaged in his pursuit of money, pressed heavily on William's conscience. At the hospital, he found Charlotte sitting in a chair by the window, her injured arm in a sling, but her color much improved. She looked up as he entered, and the smile that lit her face made William's heart skip in a way that had nothing to do with the investigation. "Detective Ashford," she said warmly, "the constable on duty told me there was activity at the mill this afternoon. Have you made progress in the case?" William pulled the chair close to hers and sat down, suddenly aware of how tired he was. "Miss Brennan, I have news. The man who attacked you has been arrested and has confessed to his crimes. You're safe now. Truly safe." Charlotte's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes filling with tears of relief. "Oh, thank God. Who was it? Someone from the mill?" "Gerald Thorne," William said gently. "Mr. Whitmore's assistant. He had been embezzling money from the mill's accounts, and when you discovered the irregularities, he tried to silence you. He also murdered Peter Sullivan for the same reason." Charlotte closed her eyes, and William saw her shoulders shake with the release of tension she had been holding since the attack. Poor Mr. Sullivan. His widow, his children, they deserved to know the truth. She opened her eyes again, looking directly at William. "Thank you, Detective. You gave me back my life, my peace of mind. I don't know how I can ever repay you." William reached out and gently took her uninjured hand in his, a gesture that crossed the boundary between professional duty and personal feeling. "You owe me nothing, Miss Brennan. Seeing you safe and well is all the payment I need." Their eyes met, and in that moment, something profound passed between them. It was more than gratitude, more than the bond formed between investigator and victim. It was recognition, the kind that occurs when two souls discover an unexpected connection in the midst of darkness and danger. Charlotte's cheeks flushed a delicate pink, but she didn't pull her hand away. "Will you be returning to Boston now that the case is solved?" The question hung in the air, weighted with unspoken hopes and fears. William had indeed planned to return to the city as soon as his investigation concluded. His work in Millbrook was finished, his duty discharged. But looking at Charlotte, seeing the hope and vulnerability in her green eyes, he found himself reluctant to leave. "I had planned to," he admitted, "but I find myself thinking that Millbrook is a pleasant town, and that I have reasons to visit more frequently than my duties might strictly require." Charlotte's smile was radiant, transforming her already beautiful face into something luminous. "I would very much like that, Detective Ashford, very much indeed." Over the following days, as Charlotte recovered her strength and prepared to leave the hospital, William found himself inventing excuses to remain in town. He needed to ensure all the paperwork was properly filed. He needed to verify witness statements. He needed to coordinate with the district attorney's office in Boston regarding Thorne's prosecution. Each excuse was legitimate but also transparent in its true purpose: to spend more time with Charlotte Brennan. They took walks together through the autumn streets of Millbrook. Charlotte's arm linked through his for support as she regained her strength. They talked about everything and nothing, discovering shared interests in literature and music, debating the merits of different detective novels, laughing over small absurdities. William told her about his childhood in New York, his decision to join the police force, his dreams of making a difference in the world. Charlotte shared her own history, her education at a ladies' academy in Connecticut, her love of numbers and organization that had led her to secretarial work, her hopes for a future that included more than just managing someone else's correspondence. On a crisp November morning, a week after Thorne's arrest, William and Charlotte stood together in the garden of Mrs. Morrison's boarding house. The landlady had given them privacy, though William suspected she was watching from a window, ensuring propriety was maintained while allowing the young couple their moment. "I must return to Boston tomorrow," William said, though the words pained him. "The trial preparations require my presence, and I've neglected my other cases for too long." Charlotte nodded, her expression understanding but sorrowful. "I know you have your duties, William. I would never ask you to abandon them." She had begun using his given name a few days earlier, a sign of the deepening intimacy between them. "Charlotte," William said, taking both her hands in his, "these past days with you have been among the happiest of my life. What began as a professional investigation has become something infinitely more precious to me. You have become precious to me, and you to me," Charlotte whispered, her eyes shining. William reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "I know this is perhaps too soon, that convention would dictate a longer courtship, but I also know my own heart, and I know what I feel when I'm with you. Charlotte Brennan, would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Charlotte's breath caught as he opened the box to reveal a delicate gold ring set with a small emerald that matched the color of her eyes. "Oh, William, yes, yes, of course, yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger and then, with great tenderness, he drew her into his arms and kissed her. It was a kiss of promise and hope, of two lives intertwining after finding each other in the most unexpected circumstances. When they finally drew apart, both were smiling through tears of joy. "I'll return to Millbrook every weekend," William promised. "And as soon as the trial is concluded and I can arrange a transfer to the district office here, I'll come home to you permanently. We'll find a house together, build a life together. I'll be waiting," Charlotte said, touching his face gently. "However long it takes, I'll be here." The trial of Gerald Thorne took place in Boston in December, a grim affair that laid bare the full extent of his crimes. The evidence was overwhelming. Charlotte's meticulous notes documenting the embezzlement, Thorne's own confession witnessed by multiple people, testimony from the night watchman about his presence at the mill when Peter Sullivan died, and the attempted visit to Charlotte's hospital room. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning a guilty verdict on all counts. Thorne was sentenced to life imprisonment for murder and attempted murder, with additional years for embezzlement. As he was led from the courtroom in chains, he looked toward where Charlotte sat beside William in the gallery. There was no defiance in his expression now, only a hollow emptiness, the look of a man who had gambled everything on greed and lost. Peter Sullivan's widow wept with relief when she heard the verdict, finally having justice for her husband and answers about his death. Theodore Whitmore, true to his word, provided her with a generous settlement and ensured that the mill's books were audited thoroughly to prevent any future theft. Christmas came to Millbrook, dressed in snow and pine garlands. William had secured his transfer to the district office and rented a comfortable house on Maple Street, just 3 blocks from Mrs. Morrison's boarding house. On a brilliant winter morning, with the town church bells ringing joyfully, William Ashford and Charlotte Brennan were married in a ceremony attended by the entire town. Charlotte wore a gown of ivory silk that Mrs. Morrison and the other boarders had helped her sew, and she carried a bouquet of white roses that had been delivered from Boston at William's request. As she walked down the aisle toward where William stood waiting, his face alight with love and happiness, she thought about how strangely fate worked. An attack meant to silence her had instead brought her the greatest blessing of her life. William watched his bride approach, and he marveled at the journey that had brought them to this moment. He had come to Millbrook expecting a routine investigation, a simple case to be solved and closed. Instead, he had found not just a criminal to bring to justice, but a woman who had captured his heart completely. As they exchanged their vows, promising to love and cherish each other through all the years to come, the winter sun streamed through the stained glass windows, painting them in colors of ruby and sapphire and gold. And when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, and William kissed his bride before God and the entire community, there was not a dry eye in the church. Their wedding breakfast was held at the Grand Union Hotel, the same building where William had stood on that rainy night just 2 months earlier, contemplating the case that lay before him. Now, surrounded by friends and well-wishers, with Charlotte's hand in his and her ring on his finger matching the one he had placed on hers, he understood that some investigations led to more than just solved cases. Some led to transformed lives, to love discovered in unexpected places, to futures bright with promise. As the celebration continued around them, William leaned close to Charlotte and whispered, "Are you happy, Mrs. Ashford?" Charlotte turned to him with a smile that rivaled the winter sun for brilliance. "Happier than I ever imagined possible, Mr. Ashford. You asked me once who did this to me, speaking of my injuries. But I think the better question now is, who brought us together? And I believe the answer is that sometimes darkness serves only to make us appreciate the light we find." William kissed her softly, there in the midst of the crowded room, uncaring of the proprieties or the watching eyes. "Then I am grateful even for the darkness, because it led me to you." And so Charlotte Brennan, who had survived an attack meant to silence her forever, found her voice in a different way. She became Charlotte Ashford, beloved wife of the district's finest detective, a woman whose courage and intelligence had not only solved a case, but had also opened the door to a love story that would last all their days. Together, they would face whatever mysteries the future held, not as detective and witness, but as partners in every sense of the word, their lives forever intertwined by the case that had brought them together, and the love that would keep them together always.